educational distribution is just a topic that's come up again and again on the D-Word online discussion forum, which, by the way, has been going on since 1999. And so we're finally going to deal with it today. And we have two great guests. We have Rachel Gordon, who is was just a normal director producer, I understand, and then took on distribution as a subject, wrote a book called The Distribution Toolkit, which she'll tell us about more in just a second, and how it applies to educational distribution. And then we have James Michael Boyer of Collective I, which is a educational distributor. And so I kind of want to kick it off by talking about, why we would go with an educational distributor versus doing it ourselves, and what are the ins and outs of doing that. But Rachel, can you quickly tell us about the distribution toolkit and how that deals as well with educational distribution? Is it focused mainly on that, or does it cover the whole gamut?
No, so it's meant to be kind of it's meant to create for everyone a documentary ecosystem. So there's 7 chapters. The first is how to get ready in general for everything. Second is about crowdfunding. Third is about documentary organizations and events to be aware of, such as D-Word, which is in there. Then the 4th chapter is on streaming, which half that information is probably no longer valid, but the technical aspects and regional and other sort of the tiers that I sort of created of how streamers work, that's kind of still valid. The 5th chapter is on social impact campaigns and nonprofits. The 6th chapter is on education. And the 7th chapter is on public television. And the US is sort of separated from the rest of the world because they work so differently. I think one thing I should actually stress about the book, which I have not previously, probably to my own detriment, is the book is really based on collecting stories from filmmakers around the world. This is not just my experience. These are direct experiences of people who've done it and how, and they provide advice and what they did in order to do it for each category that I covered. So it's not really just about me, it's about producers who are trying to help other producers.
Great, thanks. James, I am going to feign ignorance here. What does an educational distributor like Collective I do?
Yeah, that is a good question. I feel like a lot of times distribution, and not without reason, is looked at as sort of this opaque like magic bullet for like, you make your film and then you get distribution and then it's done, right? Like you're done at that stage. An educational distributor, more often than not, is handling your university, college, and K through 12 school sales. And then they're also handling maybe public library streaming and public library DVD. I say maybe because sometimes those are grouped in with consumer-facing rights instead of educational. It really depends on who you're talking to. I think Rachel's book actually does it. I have Rachel's book and I read Rachel's book, and she talks to not just filmmakers but a lot of distributors. Sarah Moss is from Together Films in there, and a couple of different people. I think it is really important to know that we are a little bit in the wild west of film right now with the pandemic. So traditional windows, your film window into your theatrical, or your festival into theatrical and non-theatrical, and all of these things that you've probably heard laid out 100 times. All of that sort of shifted, and so what an educational distributor does, I know that's probably a long-winded answer for what an educational distributor does, but it's really just maximize your film sales and visibility within that market of either universities, colleges, K through 12, and public libraries, but maybe not. Yeah.
I imagine filmmakers might go to an educational distributor because they just don't have the time or energy to do their own educational distribution. But I'm sure there's still some stuff you need from the filmmakers when they go with you. So what is it that you need from filmmakers? You know, is it sort of like deliverables, or, you know, what would help you guys sell the film best?
Yeah, so I sent over, it was like late last night, so nobody has it yet, but I sent you sort of our metadata deliverables sheet. It's like a CSV that I am happy to have shared with the D word, so you guys can actually have like an idea of what a distributor is going to ask for. There are a lot of things that you might not expect in there. So your film file, if it has burned in English subtitles over foreign language speaking, you need to have a version with that and without that. You need to have versions where your lower thirds are within a certain parameter and one where they're not, so they don't overlap with closed captions or foreign subtitles. There's lots of like very technical specifications that a distributor is going to ask, not just to make you do a lot of work needlessly. It is just all we're doing is trying to get your film ready for platform requirements. And so those deliverables, like Rachel said, you know, they change every 6 months. So that's something where even this list that I just sent you that is pretty up to date is probably going to be different in 6 months.
James, could you put the link to thing in the chat? And in fact, folks, you know, we always have like a really robust chat going on while we do it. So feel free to put up your own thoughts and ideas and links, and even your own experiences in educational distribution. We'll give you plenty of time to save the chat before you leave in the end. It's always an incredibly helpful resource. And in fact, during the Q&A section, we'll not only ask if you have questions, but if you have experiences, both pro and con, of doing your own educational distributor, we welcome you to share that. Okay, so you know, your deliverables seem mostly in terms of, you know, files and things like that, but how helpful is it to have like kind of a curriculum or a discussion guide, or, you know, a really good website? I mean, are all these factors in your wanting to take on film?
Yeah,
like how choosy are you?
That's a good question. So pretty dang choosy. And the reason is that we have never been in a time where it's more media rich. And so there are always more films submitting to Collectivi Films. There's probably 20 a week. Honestly, it's probably 20 films a week that are submitted for potential distribution. We have room at most for one a week, and that's like pushing it. Usually we try and do 2 a month, maybe 3 a month. Avoid, you know, releasing too much during the summer because universities are gone. That leaves very few slots. So having a website, you know, a nice website is important. I would love, I feel like Rachel and I can really go into like exactly the materials that you can provide. I will say that an educational guide is often something that people will list. And in my experience, there is a difference between sort of like community facilitating materials, like discussion facilitating materials, educational guides, and then like educational resources, like specific clips of a film. So having clips that talk about certain issues is awesome. Having a facilitation guide for people who are non-experts talking about the film is also really helpful. You know, if somebody just is impassioned about an environmental cause that your film is talking about, but they are not a professor of, environmental studies at a university, they might not feel comfortable talking about the film. The discussion guide of like a real, educational guide that you'll see produced is all over the place in terms of like use. So we had to do one grant mandated for Seed, The Untold Story, which is Taggart Siegel's film, our founder. Hundreds of educational university purchases, and I think an educational guide was requested twice. So the amount of like resources contributed to that guide, I mean, it probably cost $10,000, and it was used maybe twice. Which, if you don't have grant funding that requires you to do that, I don't know if that's like a great resource investment. But I would love to hear from Rachel, because I think we know that educational clips, discussion guides for non-experts are both very useful in our experiences.
You want to weigh in, Rachel? That seemed like an invitation.
So it's interesting. You mentioned that I'm a director producer, but actually how I got into documentary distribution was because in the 2000s, I ended up being what is now an impact producer, and I worked with filmmakers to get content out. The first one I worked with was Alice Elliott at Welcome Change, and did her films about disability issues and got them at events and at educational facilities. I would say higher education doesn't necessarily use them as much as like K through 12, and then you have to align it to curriculum standards, and those standards are different for every state. There are actually agencies that will align media with curriculum. We did that for Alice for like a fee, but it does go down to making sure you have a short enough clip and that the clip directly relates to what you're talking about. One of the key things that I find with filmmakers is they're just trying to like get their content out, but they're not necessarily associating it as much with the classroom that they're trying to get in. And the more you help educators use your content, the easier it is for them to do. That might mean a 5-minute clip. It doesn't mean the whole film, and that has to be okay. If I responded correctly.
James, I want to get back to, you're being very choosy. Are there particular subjects that you're looking for, or like what is it that would make a film stand out to you? Or is there something that you are missing from your own catalog of films that you're now looking for?
Yeah, there are a few parameters that we're defining or that we're using. I'm sort of a dork. If you've met me in person, you know that I'm pretty dorky about like aggregate data and measuring usage and analytics. But we will measure the film in two ways. So one is just the film quality outside of our catalog. So what we're looking at is festival play, and I know festivals are sort of a divisive topic right now. I think there's still a lot of merit in your premier festivals, so playing something like a South by Southwest or Doc NYC or Tribeca. Those still add a ton of agency to your film. There are thousands of festivals, and if they don't add agency, maybe it's not worth the fee and having to deal with putting your film out there for what is free is almost generous if you had to pay a submission fee. So we're looking at festivals. Key art is something that people really don't put a lot of time into and is super important. So
I'm sorry, could you say that again? What was that?
Key art, or your poster design. Okay. So we all judge books by covers. Like,
no screenshots.
No screenshots. Absolutely no screenshots. This sounds really callous. I will not, if I see a film with a really bad poster that is submitted, I don't even watch the trailer. Like, it is the first frame of your film is your poster. So if you are not communicating your quality in the poster, then if I don't want to watch the first frame of the film or first, minute of the trailer after looking at the poster, your average consumer audience isn't either. They're going to skip right past yours when they're on their digital platform, scrolling over endlessly, right? They're not going to stop even for a second. So that is super important. If you have a bad one, just don't submit with one. And then length is definitely important. So looking at broadcast, so either a traditional feature, something along 90 minutes, or having a international hour broadcast, so 52 to 56 minute length film is helpful. That international broadcast hour is also a really helpful educational length at like just about an hour. Since a 90-minute class, they can do some level of discussion after showing the film. And then, then we take the film after evaluating it just on its like qualitative basis, and then we look at our catalog and say, how does this fit in with our catalog? So that's when we're looking at its educational merit and saying, okay, what subject areas does it fit in? I'll say usually people, when you're submitting a film, will list way too many. That's sort of like a red flag for me, is if you're putting too many subject areas that your film is applicable to, it means that you're not diving deep enough in any given subject, that it might not be used in any. So really having a focused point of why this is important for educators. There's, these clips are some of the only clips of this person speaking this particular language. That's a great sell point.
It surprises me to say that you're considering these 90-minute feature-length films. I've always thought educational distribution helps to have like a 20-minute thing or something that fits in the classroom, particularly if you're aiming for high school students. I mean, can you distinguish between that? Do you ever ask people who have features to make a cut, that's shorter?
Yeah. So like I said, I'm going to be a little dorky with numbers. There is 11 to 15 to 1 spending power in the university and college space compared to the K through 12 space. So what that means is for every $100 that you could potentially earn in K through 12, there's $1,200 to $1,500 that you could make in the university space. So all of our everything that we do is catered towards university audiences. K through 12 audiences do enjoy the 30-minute to 50-minute cut. For the California public school system, we sold our film The Pollinators to the state, and they needed that hour broadcast cut. That shorter 52-minute instead of a feature. So if you're making your film, I would obviously recommend to have an hour. Like it might be better too. A lot of times, people think you need every minute in there after 50, but it's not the case.
Is it best for a filmmaker to wait until you want the film to make the 60-minute cut, or is it helpful to have the 60-minute cut that you can see?
Oh my gosh. Oh, hi, Glenn. So I would have the 60-minute cut. Honestly, like I would, if you are in post right now, you should be working on your 60-minute along with your feature. And if it's specifically catering towards the educational market, cut accordingly, right? So some things that I think as a filmmaking audience, like someone who loves watching film, I love cinema verite, beautiful long shots, even in documentary. That is not what the educational market likes. They like some traditional talking heads. So if you have some traditional talking heads and some more art. When you're making that 60-minute cut, you know where you can cut for the educational market.
Rachel, let's talk about those 19 films that don't make it out of 20 into educational distributors catalog. What do we do? How do we get started on self-distributing to the educational marketplace?
What an excellent question.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things to keep in mind about beginning the educational self-distribution process. First of all, it takes long. It's a long time. You're not going to get money in 6 months, most likely. For the most part, it's going to take at least a year for you to get income from it. And this is for various reasons. This is because institutions' budgets work on a certain cycle. It's because they plan a semester in advance. So they may be thinking about your film for 6 months from now. They're not going to be doing it for next week. It usually takes more than one kind of contact with them. And I would space those out to every 2 to 3 months. You don't really want to bug someone every week or even every month with your content. And I would target it based on what it is now being used for in an educational situation. So like for Alice's Films, for instance, when we did events with one of her subjects named Diana, who traveled with the film all the time, she was amazing. We would send email, like we did an event once, for instance, at MIT about disability inclusion in the workplace, and they hired Alice and her subject to come. And then so we had maybe sent out an email to everything local in the area to say this was going on. And if you could not attend, please let us know and we'll send you a screener. So it's like you use every opportunity to show how your film is being used in an educational setting so that other people get an idea of how to use it in their setting, or can ask you questions so that they can make it appropriate for their setting. There's also 2 ways that media librarians usually purchase films. I wrote about it in the book, but because I know books cost money, I'm going to tell you anyway. So one way is just in time, meaning that a professor has asked for it and then they need to have it right then and there. The other is just in case, which is like they read about it in Video Librarian or some kind of other Video Lib or Video News. And they're like, that's a great idea. I'm going to put that on my list for eventually to get it. So there's 2 different ways that librarians get it. If you want to go for professors, you can do that as well. The other kind of layer with professors of topics is that most of them belong to associations, national associations, like the Association for Asian American Studies, which I went to years ago, their conference. And so those conferences, those associations have conferences, they have newsletters. So you kind of want to deal with the topic of the school, but you also want to look at the conferences that those associations go to. And in the book, I actually, in chapter 6, have at the back a list of some distributors that I've heard of. I'm not necessarily promoting any of them. It's just ones that I've heard of that go to conferences. And then I have a list of calendar of conferences based on topic, like Middle East Studies Association, Asian American Studies. So you kind of want to tackle things in little bits at a time. And as James Michael said, you kind of don't want to do summers because no one's there. But in general, those are the kind of avenues that you would want to plan out when you're trying to do outreach for educators. Just realize it's going to take a while.
Well, what's the ideal time to get in touch with, month-wise, would you say?
I think you should try to tack things to current events. So for instance, I used to do a lot of marketings, a lot of grassroots marketings for Women's History Month, for Black History Month, for even, you may want to even do like political science is good for November, right? So you kind of want to associate your content with the right sort of time frame. And then once you've sent out your initial email or what have you, then wait a couple months, see if you get any response, see if you get any sales in. If you get a sales in and it's from a professor, write that professor and ask them for comments on whether they liked the film, whether they thought it was useful, why. See if you can use that comment to market your film further to others in that community. And so you can kind of repeat that as a process every few months or so, I would say.
Let's talk about ways of getting in touch with the right professors. Let's say I have a film about filmmaking and I think it should go into every cinema class that's ever taught anywhere in the world. And by the way, we should, after this, I want to distinguish between US educational and educational outside the US. But what are some of the databases, listservs, you mentioned VideoLib, but that would go directly to identifying which film professors I might want to get in touch with? I've heard of a thing called MDR, that's market data retrievals.
I mean, I heard of them 20 years ago. I don't know if they're still around. They may be. We used to go with someone, there are a couple. The thing is that there's a couple we used to use when I was doing this. I can look up and find out. I don't know currently who uses the service, but I can find out. I'm happy to do that. I would say the difficulty with that is that you don't know how often they update their information. When we used to buy educational media lists to do, I was told they maybe updated it every 2 to 3 years, which may or may not be okay. I mean, so I can find out for you. I do not know the answer off the top of my head. I'm not gonna.
Okay, but then what, how do I even find out what courses are being taught? And I mean, without going to every college and looking up their catalog, you know, their courses online.
I think one of the ways you could do that is looking up the sort of national society for the type of class you want. And then usually they have member universities that teach that in order to, so that you're not just doing a Google search to see how many schools you're going to list. My idea would be you would go to, you know, whether it's a film studies association, or if it's a documentary studies association, you go to like the association first, and then you see who their members are.
Okay, this
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. I mean, it's funny because, you know, George and I were writing back and forth this week, and I said, the difficulty is that I think there is a lot of opportunity for filmmakers to do this. And the thing with the educational community is that they're very open, they're very responsive, they're very nice people. The problem is just time. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy. And unfortunately, I also think that schools do not have the educational infrastructure set up to teach people about distribution. So a lot of filmmakers have to learn everything when they try by trial and error, because there's no set up education, which I'm trying to change. Help me do that.
Well, okay. Sure. There's another kind of elephant in the room, which is that, you know, in the old days of 16 millimeter, you know, educational films used to be able to be sold, you know, for $400 and rented for $250. I mean, there was like a real market there that paid well. And even with DVDs, they could, you know, you could charge a good deal. There were DVD extras and stuff. With streaming and links, you know, what do we even charge? What is, for people entering this market for the first time and don't have any idea what they should even charge? Tell us, guys, what should we be charging?
Well, so here's the difficult to answer for that. And the thing is that I think from my experience, a lot of filmmakers look at what distributors charge and they automatically assume that that's what they should be doing. And the answer is actually no, that's not true. Distributors have a certain amount of cachet, agency, as James Michael put it before. They have a certain known quantity. And so they're kind of, in a way, allowed to do that. But independent filmmakers can't go charging $400 for their film. And a lot of educational people will like bulk and they won't even ask you to lower the price because they're like, oh, I know I can't afford this, and they'll move on. So sometimes it's better to just have them like ask for it, and you can say, do you have a budget for this? Is it reasonable to ask for, $200 because of such and such? Some people do it based on full-time enrollment of students. Like if they have, like I went to school at Boston University, and the undergrad at the time was 20,000 students. Like that's going to be different than asking a small college who has a few thousand students. Like you can't ask the same thing of both, I don't think. So to some degree, I think it's better to be more flexible about pricing and not hardcore about it, because the more friendly you are to educators, the more friendly they are to you. And the more they share information, they'll tell each other when people are not respectful. They'll tell each other when people are hard. And, they're very communal, just like the documentary world. So it's kind of, I think the flexible you are, the more income you'll make, and the more people will want to actually support you doing it. Does that make any sense? I know it's not a hard, straight answer, and I apologize for that, but it's just sort of the way it is. I mean, they're struggling as much as everybody else economically. All the tuition money, all of their budgets have been cut too. So they don't have as much money as they used to either. It's not just you, it's them also.
Yeah, so don't take it personally, huh?
Yeah. Sorry, I was gonna just build off that, which is a lot of times a university is saving work when they're working with an educational distributor. They won't be saving when they're working with you as an independent filmmaker selling your film, and that is part of the price consideration. So we're, Collectivi is a registered vendor in like every university system in North America, just about. So that means on the university side, when they buy a new film from us, they don't have to do the 14 pages of paperwork to get that approved. So I would just, when you're pricing your film, factor that in. If you're doing it DIY, every time you're selling to that university, you're asking them to get all of these payee forms and vendor forms ready. And so, yeah, being priced a little bit lower than your average educational distributor is beneficial. So that's just to add to Rachel's point.
James, can you share, what the general price level is of the films in your catalog? I mean, is it done by the length of the film, or is it other factors that weigh into what you price it for?
Yeah, so our general pricing, we just try to match market rate. So you guys can look at like Roku and Good Docs and Bullfrog and all of these other educational distributors. We price our DVD with public performance rights, and I will say, like a third of universities still like buying DVDs, so don't discount the old video disc. Is $395. A university digital site license is about $500, and then the combination of the two is a little bit more. It ranges from like $520 to $550.
Cool, that's serious money. How much of that, what's the split with the filmmaker? How much is going to the filmmaker?
50-50 for direct DVD sales. And so, yeah, I think especially when framing this conversation and like, do you distribute the film yourself, or do you work with an educational distributor? The amount of time that you're wanting to live with the film is really important. So like Rachel said, it takes quite a while to actually have your film start to generate momentum and sales in the educational market. I think if you are treating educational sales as a full-time job for 2 years, then don't work with an educational distributor. Do it yourself. If you're gonna 9 to 5 wake up and reach out and cold email, and I will say that MDR is still a thing. Sorry, again, apologies for, I don't think they're very performant on the individual film scale. So when we buy lists from MDR, we are buying an environmental or film studies list, and it applies to 40 films of ours, or 50 films in the catalog. So we have a lot of touch points for those contacts purchases when we're acquiring a list. If you are just serving one film, you're only your film, I don't think it's super cost effective to buy. Though you can, I'm not saying you can't. It's just a lot of money up front. You're probably spending a few $1,000s for. It's probably going to be 1 to 3% of those professors that are buying, even within the subject area, who are going to be specifically interested in your film. Where if I carry 50 films across, various aspects of environmental studies, then 30% of that list is effective for me as a distributor, right? So it's a tough market to balance as an individual filmmaker. But if you're doing it, if you're reaching out for 2 years, treating it like a full-time job, I think you should do it yourself.
We're going to turn it over to questions really soon, and I just would suggest there's so many good questions in the chat, we can't really get to them. So I suggest that you use the raised hand function to let us know, and I'll call you in the order of the raised hands that I see. If you don't have the ability to use it because you might be on a phone, put that in the chat and I'll try and ask for you. But that would be helpful. As I asked my last few questions, maybe you guys can line up with your hands raised. And yeah, Mary Wall, I suggested you come on and why don't you raise your hand so that you can share your experiences. Like I said, it's not just gonna be for questions, but filmmakers who have experience doing probably self-distribution or going with a distributor can share what they've learned. Great, we've already had a bunch of raised hands. Okay, so a couple of final ones for me. Can we talk about the role of Canopy and how that's impacted educational distribution, both if you're doing self-distribution or for you, James? Yo, you're muted.
Yeah. So Canopy. I feel like Canopy is now viewed as like that magic bullet for educational distribution. So just super quickly, I don't want to bore you guys. Universities buy film media in 3 different ways. So there is university DVD. I'd estimate 25 to 35% of universities prefer DVD as an option. So, have a DVD if you're selling to the educational market yourself, include ADA compliant closed captions. There's another third of the university market that purchases digital site licenses. They have internal hosting mechanisms, usually Microsoft Streams, Kaltura. There are a handful of platforms where it is user authenticated, meaning they have to use their active.edu email address and then password to access your film file. And then there's about a third of the market that we call third-party dependent. And that means that they rely on a streaming service like Canopy or Alexander Street Press or DocuSeek for all of their media hosting services. So that means if you're on Canopy, that is 1/3 of the job done, right? That means 1/3 of the educational market is covered. You are not done reaching your market, and depending on your subject matter, that might not even be the place where most universities that need to hear about your film are looking for your film. So I will say, because I saw in chat, there are plenty of movies that make a lot of money on Canopy. There's one that we've had on Canopy since its origin that regularly brings in $5,000 a quarter. Every quarter on Canopy consistently. It's a staple film that is used in a bunch of classes. And then there are films that make no money on Canopy, and that is also the case. You do have that range. So yeah, I think that is my spiel about Canopy. Is it is important. It is. Oh, it's super watered down a little bit now. So I don't mean that in a really bad way, but they have a ton of content. So they went from, I think, 2,000 total films to 15,000 total films in the course of like 5 or 6 years. So just accessibility, or what we would call is origin findings, where somebody is just finding your film originating within the Canopy platform, they're not being directed there, is pretty low. Just because there's so much content that they have to filter through now.
Right.
Yep.
For filmmakers who really would like to make in-person presentation, have honorariums paid and be able to go to universities and speak with the film. I guess, James, does Collective Eye help with that? And Rachel, if you're doing it yourself, what's the best way to approach universities trying to get these kinds of gigs?
Go for it.
Me first?
Yeah.
So I always started off with something that already existed when I was doing this work. So for instance, when Alice's film, well, actually, I'll start from even the very beginning. So when I started working for Alice, her film had already been with New Day Films. I saw people commenting about New Day. New Day is great. I interviewed them for my book. The difficulty with New Day is like the percentage of acceptance is really low and it takes a long time to get in. So you're not going to get in immediately, and you should do the most you can no matter what before you go to any distributor, period. New Day is amazing. I highly recommend them. But so Alice was already a New Day filmmaker, and I took her list of films that the sales she had already done, and I wrote literally each one when it wasn't like a general email address. And I found out which professors, because this was starting from scratch. She had done an Oscar run to try to, it was nominated. She had her public television run, and then this was the next thing she wanted to focus on. So she hired me to do this. I went through her sales that she had already done through New Day. I looked at the professors, I looked at the subjects, because New Day provides those kind of explicit sales sheets every month. And I went after each different subject and asked people for comments, questions. And then I knew that we had our subjects ready to go. Alice worked with disability advocates who were amazing speakers. So I went through the subjects that had already sold, and I connected what I knew our people spoke about. And every sales email was not really sales. I think that's the other thing people need to understand. Like, you don't want to just send out an email trying to sell yourself. You are trying to give an experience and create community and outreach with your film. If you're too salesy, it's a sales pitch. It's not an interaction. And it's like a one-time thing. What I always tried to do with her was try to make sure that we could create a long-term conversation. Her films were programmed at the Society for Disability Studies, but that took 2 years of helping them understand that films were great at showing kind of the human side of what it takes to try to be a disability advocate in the world. So you're trying to create an experience and not necessarily say, sell, if that makes any sense. So, but you can do it based on the topics you know you're already good in. I mean, most of you have worked with someone in your field of interest already who likes your content, who likes what you've done, and you can use them to be like, this is the next thing that this person should do. This is the next thing that I should do. It's about sort of your topic and your experience, and not just necessarily about selling a film. Does that make any sense?
Totally. James, if we go either with Collective Eye or another educational distributor, how much marketing can we expect them to do on our behalf?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm very open about our process. So when we sign a film, it gets a newsletter announcement. So we attend a lot of educational conferences. I happen to sit on the board of an organization called Video Trust that you guys should all check out. That is really just connecting educational purchasers, your university librarians, with distributors. So, you know, I'm on there admittedly somewhat selfishly. We do buy the occasional lists from places like MDR. There's also, Richard Dill sells educational lists. Again, I really don't want to, that is not a one-stop solution, and a success rate of 1 or 2% from a list is what you should expect for what you're purchasing, right? So we'll do a newsletter announcement. Right now, our educational list is about 12,000 university heads of department, subject area librarians, and general acquisition librarians. We would cull that down to the applicable people. So, we have films that are about specific land disputes between South Korea and Japan. That is a different audience than educators who are looking at U.S. Abortion rights, right? So that is those are different audiences, and you're not going to hit all 15,000 of the people in the newsletter. Posting on educational forums. So Rachel already mentioned video news, which is an important one. As an independent filmmaker, you might have difficulty getting reviews on places like Video Librarian. Another one is EMRO, or Electronic Media Resources Online. Another one is the Public Library Journal. These are all places that we have our films reviewed. Again, you may or may not be able to do that yourself as an independent filmmaker. And then we are, thank you, Rachel. And then there is just no replacement for one-to-one reach out. So we do, and this is something that you guys can do yourself, is just find your top institutions, your most budgeted institutions of a particular subject matter. If you Google like top 100 gender studies departments, you're going to get a list. And if you get into a handful of those, there's a cascading effect, right? If you're in Harvard and Yale and NYU and University of Washington, then other schools are going to see that your film has what we call academic agency. So that's another thing that we do as a distributor. And I think almost every distributor does most of that. So you're getting some variation of those outreaches.
James, do you help filmmakers set up speaking engagements at universities?
Yeah, so it's not, I don't think that this is common, but at least the way that we work is that we ask the filmmaker what your honorarium is, like what's your preferred honorarium, what's your minimum honorarium, and then we negotiate on your behalf, and then we have the institution pay you 100% of that honorarium at the date of your speaking engagement. If you don't want to take payment as the filmmaker directly, then we'll hold on to that payment for you and issue it out in quarterly royalties, but it comes at a 10% fee. That's just literally the cost of like taking money and then issuing out money.
Okay, final question from me before I turn it over to everybody else. And that is, if we think our film has educational potential outside the US, and we're US I assume foreign filmmakers can come to you guys, for films that might work in the US market. What do we do if we think it works beyond the US market?
You want me to go first, or you want to go first?
Go for it.
Okay. So I think films can go everywhere. After talking to filmmakers from literally all over the world for my book, they can go anywhere and everywhere. The trick is that you need to make sure that the community makes sense, right? The problem with education overseas is that the educational system of like sort of payment and programming was really created in North America. It was really created in the US and Canada based on copyright law. And copyright law is not the same internationally. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't like educational setups in Europe or in other places, but they're not going to be an exact match. So you kind of need to see how the copyright law works over there. You can even ask, some of the in chapter 7, I did some TV distributors, but some of those TV distributors also do, educational overseas. You can probably write some of them and ask them questions. Some of them are more friendly than others, but basically, you may also want to go through like documentary organizations that are in other countries, such as, D-Word is great because it's everywhere. There are documentary organizations, which I also listed in chapter 3, that are connected to the universities there that teach film and documentary and stuff like that. So you kind of want to reach the organizations that already deal with the educational communities there to understand like how you can, whether you can. I know it is technically possible. It just may not, the language may not be the same, and it may not be this equals this exactly. Am I making sense?
Yes, I'll just say the D-Word does not have connections with educational outlets overseas. So don't come to us for that, but come to us for many, many other things. Anything you want to add to that, James?
Oh, I was just going to say foreign sales. There are specific territories. So Sweden, Israel, and China. A lot of times you can't just sell directly, even as a distributor like ourselves. And there are educational entities there. I will horribly mispronounce it, but I think it's Canopy Media that's up in Sweden. They will buy some of our content, and then they will make a whole Swedish version of the film to sell to Sweden. And that comes with the just Swedish university mandates of how much easier it is to buy something that comes from a Swedish company versus a foreign company. So there's a lot of nuance when it comes to exactly like to selling your university.